comparaître devant Dieu. Il est encore temps de confesser vos fautes.
Continue, nous allons étouffer avant que vos Templiers ne brûlent.
Taisez-vous, Louis.
Honte! Honte! Vous voyez des innocents qui meurent! Honte sur vous tous! Dieu vous jugera! Pape Clément, chevalier Guillaume de Nogaret, roi Philippe, avant 1 an, je vous cite à apparaître au tribunal de Dieu pour y recevoir votre juste châtiment. Maudit! Maudit! Soyez maudits jusqu'à la 13e génération de mon race! Maudit! Maudit! Ah!
Alors, mon frère, voilà content, je pense.
Non, je ne suis pas content. J'ai commis une erreur. J'aurais dû leur faire arracher la langue avant de les brûler.
The book is Templars and Rosicrucians, the inner and secret part of the Temple Order, the Brotherhood of the Whole Rose-Croix, by Domizio Cipriani. I will put the link in the video description. And I'm going straight to chapter 3. What happened after the death of Jacques de Molay? On October 13, 1307, the king, fearing that the Temple Order would no longer submit to his wishes, did so, and as told by Dupuis, La condamnation des Templiers, page 10, that all the Templars were arrested, sending to his officers his letters containing the arrest and arrest warrant for all the militiamen, with the precise order that all these letters be opened simultaneously on the same day and at the same time, under the penalty of being subjected to his indignation. All this was implemented also towards the Grand Master of the Order, who was in the Temple of Paris. Quote, the king instantly took possession of the temple, moved into the sea, put his treasure and the papers of France, appropriated all the rest of their possessions. End of the quote. Many Templars suffered the torment and many times confessed ignominies, even to stop the suffering of torture. A witness who declared this was one of the superiors of the order, Ponzar de Giziaco, who admitted, and I quote, that they had been tortured in many places, that everything they had confessed had been for fear of death. End of the quote. And the page is 44. Thus, over the years of bubbles in decrees, from councils to councils, Philip and Clement V tore the temple to pieces. The March 11, 1313 still describes Dupuis, page 66, quote, the two prisoners, Jacques de Molay and the brother of Dauphin de Viennois, were burned alive on the island in front of the Augustins of Paris, where they endured death very constantly. Historians like Mariana and Paul Émile remember that the Grand Master said something about death, and the sure thing is that happened was that in the same year Pope Clement V died on the 12th on the calends of May, on April 20th, 1314, and that Philippe le Bel, falling from his horse in the forest of Fontainebleau, died on November 29th, without having had time to reconcile with God. We know, however, that in these years of trials from 1307 to 1313, the Templars were not treated everywhere in the same way. In London, well protected by their commands, 230 militiamen, mostly coming from the high nobility, lived in great opulence. Edward, King of England, had not yet confiscated their property. Condemned in Lombardy, they were declared innocent in Ravenna, in Bologna, and in Salamanca. The German writers reported, Utius in Caro, book 22, page 211, and Seraphius in Caron Mogant, book 5, page 850, that, quote, that Pope Clement V sent the Archbishop of Mayence the bull of condemnation of the Templars to publish it, and that, having gathered his cleric to make this publication, Hugues Walligraf, or Comes Silvestris, one of the first of the order, accompanied by 20 armed Templars, entered the place where the Archbishop was holding his assembly. The astonished Archbishop received them humanly. Hugues assured them that they had not come to do violent acts. He nevertheless said that they had said in anger that they had gathered to publish the bubble against them, that there was an order of condemnation by Clement to the future council under the next pope. The archbishop, fearing to be captured by these armed Templars under their cloaks, promised to read the contents to those who wished, but Hughes invited him to do it at the time, and so it was. Once heard, it was understood that it contained their defenses, and the injustice used by their enemies, that everything the witnesses heard against them was false, that miraculously their clothes were not burned. End of the quote. Condamned des Templiers, page 69. In Aragon, page 57, the king camps around the castle of Moncon, the main fortress of the temple. Barthélemy de Belluy defends the position, but is besieged by Caro de Luna, governor of Aragon. After a long resistance, the surrender happened. Other fortifications fell in their turn. Mirouette, Cantavieja, Castello, the survivors are taken prisoner, and the Pope instructs the Bishop of Valence to instruct the process. The letter number 142 contained in the Registre du Trésor speaks of the traité entre les gens du roi et les hospitaliers, touching the assets of the Templars. The Pope, recognizing the frank will of the king, asked him to help and favor the hospitaliers in taking possession of Templar assets. Thus it was that the hospitaliers, by virtue of the Bull of Union and the order of the king, became owners of the assets of the temple in the kingdom of France. Dupuy, pages 70 and 73. The act was ratified on February 14, 1315, between King Louis le Hutin and Foulques de Villaret, Grand Master of the Hospital. Finally, in France, many were the Templars who managed to flee to Spain, Portugal, to England, and Germany. Many took refuge in monasteries, and others even asked for admission to the order of the Hospitaliers. Among the fugitives were also found the founders of the Order of Freedom Friars of the Rosicrucians, Gaston de la Pierre, Phoebus, Guidon de Motanor, Gentilis de Foligno, Henri de Montfort, Louis de Guérimois, Pierre Yorick de Rivaux, and César Mainvieille. One by the chaplain of the manor of Bezardière near Mans, of 7 Templars, who readily turned toward Dinard, then in the direction of Saint-Malo, where they embarked at night on a fishing boat that led them to English soil. The London commandery received them fraternally and hosted them. Chapter 4. The birth of Frère Aîné de la Rose-Croix. A month had passed since the death of the Grand Master of the Temple. King Edward of England had not yet confiscated the assets of the militia when Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus reunited his fellow sufferers and spoke to him openly. Persistent rumors were amplified with regard to the intention of the English sovereign to seize their assets. It was therefore worth running away to Scotland, where they would be received with all honors as long as this was still possible. 22 riders out of the 237 who reside in London opted to leave. A few days later, they reached the island of Mull, where a large group of knights welcomed them with open arms. Some of them had already decided on June the 24th, 1307, a new constitution for the order. On June 24th, 1313, they held a chapter during which Aumont was appointed Grand Master, and it was on this occasion that the idea of what would later become Scottish Freemasonry took shape. Nevertheless, this draft of philosophy did not fully satisfy all the knights. It was so for Guy de Montanor, erudite gentleman who was a doctor in alchemy, in full consciousness, endowed with a superior intelligence. He had been one of the most devoted disciples of a temple master. In the course of his teachings he met other disciples, among whom Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus, less fortunate than Montanor, who had managed to brilliantly overcome the 7 initiatory degrees. Phoebus was only at the 5th grade when the catastrophe began. Guy de Montanor offered to equalize his initiation on condition that his companion would help him form a group capable of perpetuating alchemy. Given the importance of teaching, logic and security required that everything remain secret. Pierre Phoebus, a very open-minded spirit, could immediately be the guarantor of many knights of whom he knew the intelligent and moral values. In a few weeks the student made progress on the alchemical and recruitment level. 20 chosen knights formed a homogeneous group, very religious in their feelings, but outraged at heart by Clement V's actions towards the temple. Their first goal was to create their own church, a church where the same right is respected, but where the hierarchy stops at the cardinals. Here the Templar Church was born. To point out their anti-pope will, they adopted as their emblem the pelican which opened its flank to give life to its young, with at the top a cardinal hat with 6 acorns. Their motto, Deum sibi caeteris. 2 prior Templars, in line with their ideas, began to celebrate Mass for them daily. Days, months, and years went by. The group of 20 had been enriched by 8 members. 4 confrères now had the secret of secrets. Guy de Montanor, Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus, Pierre le Bon de Lombardie, and Richard called Richard Langlois because it came from the commando of London. That commandant had welcomed them at the time of their exile, and had on its coat of arms the Agnus Dei that helped the Templar cross, confirmed by M. Lucien A. Carney in the Atlantis manuscript number 216, page 288, where he writes, quote, The Agnus Dei de Londres et l'argent à l'Agnus Dei au naturel, nimbé d'or, au bâton à la croix pâtée des gueules. La figure sur les blasons des clés de voûte du château fort de Tortoise, en Terre Sainte. This Agnus Dei will be adopted in memory of a blazon and perpetual official seal of the Imperators de F.A.R+C. They will only add one thing to him, the symbolic beau sang. We arrive in October 1316. Philip V the Long, his king from July the 5th of the same year, succeeded his brother Louis X, le Hutin. Jacques II, elected Pope August 7, 1316, reigns in Avignon with the name of Jean XXII. From September 8, the date of his coronation, in the Metropolitan Church of Saint-Jean. In Scotland, our 28 confrères dream of seeing the land of France again. a final farewell to their Scottish brothers who had attended all the meetings, and here is our group rowing towards the land of France. They landed in the small cove of Saint-Gonorrhe. Then, being fit with a saddle and mounts, they set off in small groups, took over the direction of Avignon, where they had set up a meeting point. On November 17th, our 28 confrères were again reunited and asked for an audience with His Holiness Jean 22. The meeting was very cold at the beginning, and their security seemed very precarious, but suddenly there was a radical change in the attitude of the Pope. What happened in particular? A simple name pronounced during the conversation by Guy de Montano changed the course of events. His name was that of Arnaud de Villanova, the famous doctor who taught alchemy to Barcelona, who had replaced his teacher Casamila. Was it not the doctor that all the courts of Europe were chasing? Didn't Clement V expressly summon him to take care of his calculations? Clement V had published an encyclic letter during the General Council of Vienna, in which he invited all those who lived under his obedience to let him know where the Traité de la Pratique de la Médecine was written for Arnaud de Villanova and dedicated to the sovereign pontiff. Skillfully maneuvered, the conversation convinced Jean 22 that his noble gentleman possessed the secrets of secrets, and that Providence sent them to him in his regard. From that moment he used velvet gloves, and it was all smile. The Pope even proposed to work in brotherhood and to have as his only mission to perpetuate this divine philosophy. He kept them lodged at his palace, assuring him shelter and cover. In exchange, Guy de Montano and Pierre le Bon de Lombardie, they would have informed him about their science. On December 2nd, the group's name was decided, Frère Aîné de la Rose-Croix. The Holy Father would then suggest to Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus to return to Scotland to try to recover new confrères, and he would also have provided them with shelter, coverage, and complete protection. During his absence, the Pope submitted to the rector of the Hospitaliens of Pont Saint-Esprit, under the oath to maintain its secret, the project of a rule for the new order. The rector was indeed a Templar elder who, from 1307, retired wounded in this monastery. His high nobility, his unusual erudition, quickly made him the undisputed rector to this community. The sovereign pontiff knew very well, therefore, to whom he was addressing to draft his secret rule. Pierre Phoebus agreed to leave, but first he kept talking to the rector of the Hospitaliers in order to give him all the useful instructions. The unfortunate never saw his brothers again, since on the way back, coming from the island of Mull, while he was riding with 17 knights he had recruited, they were attacked near Mans, where a message was waiting for him at Montfort-le-Rotrou by large troops of brigands, half soldiers and begging vehicles, who ambushed him. There was a great carnage. We can still find in our days a farm that bears the name La Massacrerie, which means that the history of this battle was tenacious. The chronicle reports that there were 13 dead on the Lord's side and 34 on the side of the brigands. Unfortunately, Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus, creator of the Frères Aînés de la Rose-Croix and of the Templar Church, was among the corpses in that forest. The five who managed to escape from the ambush transported the bodies of their unfortunate confrères to the nearest chapel. Instead, the body of Pierre Phoebus, with his crusader suit, was transported to the castle of his friend Henri de Montfort, and his burial took place in the same lands as the count. Today this soil belongs to a small and sympathetic municipality sartoise, Pont de Gênes. In its cemetery we can still find the tomb called of the Crusader. In the hollow column is the broken sword of the deceased. The days pass. Our five survivors of the massacre arrived in Avignon on Christmas evening. Their presence brought pain, but a fraternal spirit of union enveloped everyone. During this period of the Holy Father, in revenge for the contempt of the Italian episcopate that obliged him to remain in Avignon, invested 8 new cardinals, all French, in the 4th of December 1316. Among these new promoters there was also his own nephew Jacques de Viat, to whom he gave the vacant episcopal see of Avignon. The cardinal's headdress was handed to him shortly afterwards. Jacques de Viat had to play a decisive role in the history of F.A.R.+C. On January 5th, the rector of the Hospitaliers went to Avignon at the request of the Pope, gathered in a large hall under the presidency of the Holy Father. Cardinal de Viat, the director of the Hospitaliers, and our 32 confrères were present. The rector began the reading of the rule, such as according to instructions received from the regret and brave Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus. Each article was evaluated and discussed. The Pope managed to remove the clause that dealt with the subject of the Templar Church, that is, of a church without the Pope. Paradox. However, since our ex-Templars wanted to preserve this Templar cult, very dear to their days of exile, the Holy Father had to employ a trick, impose his own nephew as emperor. He asked this as a grace and thanks for all he had done for them. Our brothers accepted. The Pope then proposed that the head of their brotherhood should have all the powers to avoid any misunderstandings or problems. They could witness it to them, seeing their cardinals going in all directions. Our 32 were convinced the entry of Jacques de Viat in their ranks brought their number to 33. The Pope seemed to have won the game and achieved a double goal. 1. His nephew being cardinal and emperor, the red headdress of the Templar Church took on a completely different meaning. 2. Through the full powers clause and through his nephew, he kept this very secret order at his disposal. Well, the man proposes and God disposes. What the Pope had imposed, done and blessed between commas, if he turned against him, because the designs of God are indecipherable. On May the 6th, 1717, Jacques de Viat will die murdered. The Holy Father flees fleetingly from this collective poisoning. The poisoning actors were Hugues Guéraud, Bishop of Cahors, Pierre d'Artige, Seigneur of Poitiers, Jacques said Brabancon, and Dr. Jean Damas. Cardinal Bertrand de Castanet received the order to proceed against the guilty. Cardinal Berenger Bérenger de Frédol had the sentence executed. However, as far as the Rose-Croix order is concerned, it was no less true that the emperor's position became vacant and that it retained all its powers. Here is what was the first constitution of the Supreme Council. Imperator posthumously Gaston de la Pierre Phoebus, second emperor, cardinal, bishop de Avignon, J. de Via, sénéchal coadjutor de la Rovere, grand commandeur, Pierre le Bon de Lombardie, great-headed commander, Richard Langlois, commander Guidon de Montanor, Hierophant Major, lanceur de l'île, Hierophantes, Ortolan and Audonin, guard of seals and treasures, Louis de Grimoire, Grand Master Henri de Montfort, Grand Master Pierre Yorick de Rivaux, Grand Master Baron de la Pierre, Grand Master César Mainvieille, Grand Master Jean-Marie de Senectaire. Thus, 14 knights formed the Great Council. As for the 19 masters guiding, 6 of them were identified. Henri Manfred de la Pierre, Phoebus, son of Gaston, Gentilis de Foligno, Louis d'Arville, Renaud d'Epin, et Leroux de Bretagne. We can point out that already from the first council 2 characters shield themselves behind a pseudonym, the Baron de la Pierre and Leroux de Bretagne. The latter simply adopted the nickname, between commas, of his ancestor Jean I of Bretagne, and therefore the motto is significant, Secretum meum, my secret. Nevertheless, the Pope, having passed his first pain, reacts in order to get his hands on this order that he had so much at heart. A series of circumstances each time hampered his plans. He appointed Bishop Arnaud de Via, brother of Jacques, and placed him at the head of the episcopal see of Avignon. Only 4 months had passed since the death of Jacques and the appointment of his brother. On the F.A.R plus seaside, the pontifical charm was exhausted. All the members of the Great Council were reunited as required by the statute of their rule. It was better to act quickly. In secret, the 13 confrères met, and in 2 days, Guidon de Montanor was elected 3rd emperor. Later, then Jean XII assembled them to impose his second nephew on him, which is John XII. In English. The council apologized and showed him the assembly report which appointed Guidon de Montanor as the supreme emperor without the powers. The Holy Father took the thing very badly, but he became inclined, as a refined politician he was, to the rules he had himself adopted. He demanded only one thing, that the order should remain in Avignon for some time yet, a request which was very willingly approved by all. The election of Arnaud de Via is very controversial. Some authors, like G.B. Joudou, gave him as his brother's successor. Jean XXII would have appointed him bishop 4 months later in September, so much so that the other authors question his appointment. The coat of arms reproduced by Henri Renard Lespinasse. Armoirie historique du diocèse et de l'État de l'Avignon, Paris, 1974. based on what is depicted in the chapel of Jean 22 and in the cathedral of Enghien. The coat of arms of Jacques and Arnaud are exactly the same for the period 1317 to 1318. Note that the real family name of the second emperor is Gilles de Villemur. Jacques de Vial was already a pseudonym meaning the way, a whole program for an alchemist. Rosicrucian is certainly a fact for us. It is only through the appointment of Guy de Montano as successor to Jacques that the papal hand on this organization loses its grip. Our brothers, despite their acts of liberalism, felt great gratitude for this pontiff who had collected, hosted, and protected them, and had given them a rule. Didn't this rule bear the seal of Jacques de Vial de la Rovère and the rector of the Hospitalière de Pont Saint-Esprit? Did not have the direct approval of the Holy Father? Nothing could stand before them. After the election of Guy de Montano, the first act of the order was to choose a new brother in order that the number of 33 be respected. Their choice fell on a provincial gentleman, and Gerard de Nerre, who successfully devoted himself to natural science and medicine. Meanwhile, the months passed. His Holiness and all the confrères of the order deepened their studies on alchemy. We were in 1319. Here we touch on a little trivial trait of the character of the time. Jean 22 sold the indulgence and absolution from all crimes, inserted a tax through which, by means of a fixed price, the attacks, even the most heinous, they were acquitted. End of the quote. Histoire des souverains pontifes, 1855, page 125. No one protested. High Church dignitaries and frères aînés de la Rose-Croix remained speechless. Everyday life continued for everyone as if nothing had happened. Religious for the clerici and scholar for the F.A.R+C. Quote, in 1331, the day of All Saints, the Holy Father preached that the saints of heaven would not enjoy the beatific vision until the day of the final judgment. The same sermon of the third Sunday of Advent, and again on the evening of Epiphany, 1333. This doctrine, contrary to common persuasion, generates many scandals. The opinion of the pontiff was condemned in a theologian assembly in Vincennes by the French bishops before the king. End of the quote. Photo C, 110, opposite page 187. The outcry was general, and we were already beginning to discuss dispossessing the Pope who had these intentions in the flesh. Jean 90 was forced to retract, and the public consistory summoned. Entered in pale hall, visibly upset, but walking courageously and smiling as if the hour of his death had been postponed. He ascended to his throne and pronounced the following retraction. Quote, we confess that we believe that the souls separated from the bodies and purified dwell in heaven with the angels and contemplate God in his divine essence. End of the quote. What fell with the seal of indulgences, the triple prayer concerning the blessed vision of the saints, will realize it. The Christian soul of us, F.A.R+C. It revolted, as all the clerics revolted. Despite the public reaction of the Pope, the order decided to leave Avignon and to reach Provence before separating and carrying out each one's mission. Henri de Montfort who had one of his relatives with whom he shared the same principles in the Var, proposed himself to others as a guide to lead them in their destination. The ceremonial farewells of the Pope and of the F.8.R+C, they were touching, but it was time for the order to put its rule into practice, as all the confrères now had their followers. At dawn the troops set off. The sovereign pontiff, with tears in his eyes, gave him his blessing. From that moment the fate of the order really began. I will be at chapter 5, the big start, that page, what is this page? 69.